for the chairperson, and then once that's done, the chair can lead the subsequent elections. Are there any further nominations for the position of chair? Okay, hearing none, what I'll do is I'll first lead off with a vote for Luke Freudenberg, yay or nay, and depending upon that vote, we may proceed to, we'll actually do the second vote anyway. But all those in favor of Luke Freudenberg as chair of the ZBA for the 2020 to 2021 calendar year, and I'll do a roll call vote for this as for all votes for the meeting, and I'll start first with Tim Cronin, the nominator.
Yes.
Okay, Tim, thank you. Audrey Klein.
Yes.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
No.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
No.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Luke.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a vote of 3-2 in favor. And for continuity, all those in favor of Sarah Silk for chair of the ZBA? And we'll go roll call again. And let's start with Tim Cronin again for sake of order.
No.
Thank you, Tim. I think I went to Audrey next.
No.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you, Suzanne. And lastly, Luke Freudenberg.
No.
Okay, so that vote fails 2-3. So chair is defined as Luke Freudenberg for the 2020 year. And Mr. Chair, would you like to lead the proceedings for the vice chair and clerk positions?
Sure. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
Nominate Sarah Silk.
Okay, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, seeing none. Matt, if you want to do the roll call on that. You're still on mute, Matt.
I'm sorry. Thanks. Tim.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Audrey.
Yes.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
Sure. Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you. And Luke Freudenberg.
Yes.
It's a unanimous vote, 5-0 in favor of Sarah Silk as the chair, or vice chair rather, of the ZBA. And then a clerk position as well, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that.
I'll nominate Tim Cronin as clerk.
Thank you, Luke.
You're welcome. Are there any other nominations for clerk? Seeing none, I'll close that. Matt, if you do a roll call.
Absolutely. Mr. Cronin.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Klein.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Silk.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan.
No.
Thank you. And Mr. Freudenberg.
Yes.
Okay, that's a 4-1 vote for Tim Cronin for clerk of the ZBA, and all the officers are therefore defined.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. So we'll start off with our public hearings. The first public hearing, Matt, tax map 217-196. That's Frank W. and Jared R. Burke. Is there an update on
Read
that?
that off, Luke?
You're certainly welcome to read it, but I just did want to comment that, as I said in my emails over the weekend, the applicant did request a continuance. They are still trying to determine a path forward based on the feedback from abutters that they've received. It was a bit late coming in as a request, but they did request to continue a period of 1 more month, which would bring them to July 6th of this year. If the board is willing to entertain another continuance, then I would recommend a motion to continue the consideration of that case until July 6th, 2020 at 7 p.m.
This is Sarah. I'll make that motion.
I'd like to have
that motion.
I'd like to have discussion on this.
Okay, so there's been a motion made and seconded. We can do discussion, certainly. Suzanne?
Yes. This application came in March of 2020, and we gave it a continuance April, and I think one of those continuances, and it may have been that April one, was because we were going to this format and we did it for the whole slate. But then again, on 5/4, the applicant requested another continuance or a continuance, and it basically is stating the same reason. After thought of what to do with the property, he asked for continuance till June 1. It seems to me the application's incomplete, as the applicant does not know what he really wants to do with the building. It also seems to me that what it does, it puts the neighborhood on notice, the abutters, the neighborhood on notice, and leaves them in limbo since March, and now we go to July. I think it's terribly unfair to the neighborhood to do that. I would strongly recommend that we do not continue this application, whereas it's incomplete. The applicant has stated he does not know even what he wants to do with the property. So therefore, I would not vote in favor of or give a second to that motion.
Any other comments? Matt, do you want to clarify any of that, or?
The only item I would clarify is that although the applicant states that they are unsure what their intent is with the structure, they have submitted a ZBA application for a very specific use. I think that they themselves are having, I guess they're probably reconsidering that specific use, but the use has been submitted for a dwelling unit. There's no question about that, but I do agree that the nature of the continuances has not been ideal. I do agree as well that it does put the board and the neighborhood in an awkward position. Depending on what the board does, though, I would not support, I mean, Suzanne, I think the point that Suzanne is making is to basically not continue it and the application simply dies on the vine rather than any kind of denial. I don't think that's what Suzanne is recommending. I think she's simply suggesting that whenever the application does come forward, it should be required to submit a new application with new notice to the abutters directly. Am I right on that, Suzanne?
Yes, I'm saying deny it without prejudice. Therefore, that allows them to bring it back and to get their ducks in a row. Everyone can settle down and we'll get through the summer and then let him figure out what he wants to do.
Because I think the critical point is that the application, I think, is complete. It's a matter of the applicant does not want to proceed based on some of the concerns that they've heard and their own rethought of the process and the use. I think the application is complete. So I think to Suzanne's point that you have an option between a continuance and a denial without prejudice. I think those are really the two options that you have this evening.
I agree
So
with
Matt, I've never heard of a denial without prejudice from a ZBA. Is that an actual thing or are we making that up?
No, that's an actual thing. That's something this board has done, I think, at least one time.
Numerous
Yeah, one time
times.
since I've been with the town and many times in the past. Simply, obviously not removing the applicant's or the owner's ability to resubmit the same application. And it's really only, to get to what I think you're getting at, Audrey, it's really only done in cases where there's some issue, technical issue, or the applicant wants to functionally withdraw but doesn't actually want to withdraw the application. There have been odd circumstances, I think, in every case where that has actually been the motion by the board. And please do correct me, Suzanne, or others who've been on the board if I'm wrong on that.
Well, we've done it with
an actual thing that we're not, because if we're to deny it, they can't come back without, substantially different application. I don't want to make the mistake of putting them in that position. If there is this denial with non-prejudice, which I understand is a court thing, but I've never seen on a ZBA, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I've just never seen it. I think that makes sense.
Would Sarah withdraw her motion that didn't get a second?
I will withdraw my motion, except I did think there was a second, but I'm not certain who made it.
I don't think there was a second. I think Suzanne had said she had some comments before anybody had a chance, so.
So let's, so Suzanne, do you have a new motion?
Well, the motion is to, what am I saying? To deny the application without prejudice.
Is there a second to that motion? I'll
Yes,
go ahead,
this is
second.
Sarah.
Okay, motion's been made and second. Is there any further discussion on Suzanne's motion?
I'd like to clarify also that the applicant can resubmit the same one. He can submit an amended one, a different one. The door is open to whichever he prefers to do. It gives him some flexibility, gives him time to figure out what it is he really wants to do, and it calms the neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Matt, do you want to do a roll call vote? Matt, you're off. You're off again.
I'm supposed to be the one that knows what I'm doing here, right? So the motion on the floor is to deny the application without prejudice, as motioned by Suzanne Ryan. Tim Cronin, let's start with you.
Yes.
Thank you, Tim. Audrey Klein.
Yes.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
Yes,
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes,
Thank you. And Luke Freudenberg.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a vote of 5-0 to deny the application without prejudice. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have a series of 3 cases, and I'll let the clerk read the first case, which is case 06-V-20.
On tax map 149-006, applicant Beth Baldwin Trust, public hearing for a variance under section 175-64A 1,4 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the construction of a mudroom addition within the front and shoreline setbacks of the shorefront residential district. Property is located at 8 Fern Avenue. Site visits that were completed, I did mine last month. If each person, I'm not sure who else went. I don't know if you want to do a roll call on that, Matt.
Sure, I'm happy to do a quick indicator roll call. So Tim Cronin, you said you did visit the site last month.
Yes.
Audrey Klein.
Yes, I did.
Thank you,
This
Audrey.
afternoon.
This afternoon. Okay, great. Thank you. Sarah Silk.
I saw it this afternoon when I got out of work.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
yes,
Thank you, Suzanne and Luke.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, each of you. And I believe the clerk has read into the record. I just want to mention for procedural purposes that what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand the controls over to Mr. Rhines. He does have a plan that he'd like to walk through with the board. So I'm going to hand the controls over to him. Might just be a second here. And then I think Mr. Rhines will address the application, obviously, with the regular procedures, within the regular procedures of the board. And Jim.
Good evening, Jim.
Good evening.
Jim, you have control now. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
No.
I
Yep.
can.
Nobody else can?
I
okay.
can.
Jim,
I
Jim,
I
this
can
is
see.
Sarah. I'm on a phone. Can I just confirm that it's the plan that you gave us in our packet?
Yes, Sarah. The only difference is this one's colored up to make it a little easier for the board and the public to see. But
Okay, thank you.
it's the same plan. Okay, is everyone ready?
Yes.
All right, for the record, I'm Jim Rhines from White Mountain Survey and Engineering, and I'm here representing the Beth Baldwin Trust in a request for 3 separate variances on property located at 8 Fern Avenue and depicted on tax map 149 lot 6. The trustee of the trust, Beth Baldwin, has moved here full-time, and as such, she would like to have a mud room and a garage for her vehicles and for coming in the winter time. Initially, this project started out with Beth looking to have an attached garage to her home. As we did our survey, we discovered that it was in fact two separate lots of record, even though it's being taxed as one with a right-of-way over the lot. The survey discovered that it was two separate lots of record made up actually of 7 different parcels of land. And Fern Avenue is a fee interest road left over by the developer who created the development down along Fern Avenue and Fernal Crossing. So therefore it became a mudroom attached to the existing house and a detached garage. When we created the initial application that was submitted in March, there was discussion in the neighborhood that we had the garage being only 11 feet from Fern Avenue, and the abutters were concerned that that would make it difficult for them to continue to walk down Fern Avenue here through this location out to Fernal Brook and view the sunset and just the area. So after hearing those concerns, we ended up pushing the garage back so that it is now 20 feet from here, which would give room for any vehicles that were not in the garage to park here and be wholly out of Fern Avenue, so that there would be no obstructions to people that wanted to walk down Fern Avenue. And as a result of that, you see the changes here. As part of this, making this a year-round home and everything, one of the reasons why we needed to have the garage closer to Fern Avenue was because we want to put in a new sewage disposal system. And we were proposing a tank here with a pump chamber to pump over to an effluent disposal here. The challenges with that are the abutters here, the Carol Paczynski Trust. They have a well that was drilled essentially right on the boundary line. It's 0.4 of a foot inside the boundary line. Part of the well casing actually encroaches over onto this property. We have the lake, and we also have some wetlands on the property. This well was drilled prior to August 24th, 1989, which provides it with protections that don't exist for wells that were drilled after that date. Specifically, wells drilled after that date, they have no protection except that a property owner can put a septic system no closer than 10 feet to their boundary line. When we notified the state, we sent them a copy of the plan and said, look, we have setbacks to the lake, we have setbacks to the pre-89 well, and we have setbacks to wetlands. And the state said, okay, what we want you to do is split the difference between the well, the pre-89 well and the lake, and get the system wherever you can and whatever setbacks you can get from the wetlands. We would ultimately be applying at the state level. If we were to be successful here, we would be applying for a septic system approval that would require wetlands waivers, setbacks to the wetlands, and what's called an encroachment waiver to the abutter's well. So though I don't show it here, with the seasonal high water table being high here, there would be a fill slope that would come over almost to this garage, and hence the reason why we've placed it where we did. we are, as was stated at the beginning, and we can take these however you want, but I think the presentation makes the most sense if I sort of speak about all of them initially as one. Since this is an existing lot that does not have a primary use, we are actually seeking a variance to allow a accessory use on a lot without a primary use. And as part of that, the property owner has agreed to put on a self-imposed deed restriction that these two lots could never be sold separately. So I think that is, and the septic system is going to be a pre-treatment system called the clean solution, which allows for the smallest footprint and basically clarified effluent rather than non-clarified effluent as also part of this process. If we are successful here, we will have to go to the planning board for a special use permit for activity, both the leach field and the garage within setbacks, the 25-foot no-touch buffer and the 75-foot no structures within this little wetland here, right on the northerly boundary, is a very poorly drained pocket. All the other wetlands are poorly drained. So we would be seeking relief there, and then we will need both a state of New Hampshire shoreland permit and a town shoreland permit. I should point out that the mudroom, the relief we're seeking from the waterfront is 33.5 feet. The current structure is about 25 feet in this location, so we are further from the lake than the existing one, and but we are 4/10 of a foot off of the overhang, would be 4/10 of a foot away from the boundary line of Fern Avenue. So that is an overview of these. I couldn't go through. I can answer some questions now that the board may have, and then I can go through the criteria. I'm just not sure how the board would proceed.
Let's go through the criteria first, and then we'll open the public session up.
Okay, so when I submitted this, since they are the same lot on the tax map, I called one of them the house lot, which is the southerly lot, and I called the other one the garage lot. So I'll go through the house lot first.
Can I please interrupt and ask a question?
Okay, Suzanne.
Whereas he's kind of combining but separating, my question is twofold. Since the applicant is so willing to put something in writing that the garage lot would remain a garage lot, why does the applicant not do a lot merger, number one? Or number two, as a minimum, why don't they show a zigger that lot is part of that lot? The house is part of the garage lot, with the zigger.
So the reason for that, Suzanne, is the actual fee interest in Fern Avenue is actually held basically by the heirs. It would take quite a bit of work to find all of the people or the heirs of the original developer of Fern Avenue. So these don't actually abut. That's why they can't be merged. So that's the reason. And the reason I didn't put a zigger is because of that reason.
Mr. Chair, could I just make
Okay.
a procedural? Sorry.
Go ahead, Ben.
Just a procedural note. So I did advise Jim to do a joint presentation, but for the purposes of the individual cases, what I would recommend is that Mr. Rhines review the criteria for a given case. The board debate those criteria, make a decision. Then Mr. Rhines review the criteria for the next case. make a decision, and with each of those, open the public session as well. I think from this point forward, they should be handled as individual applications.
Okay. So Jim, if you want to go through the criteria now, that would be great.
So Matt, I broke them up into two, the house lot and the garage lot. If I do the house lot, that's just going to be setbacks, right?
So Jim, the house lot is just the setbacks. That's correct. The shore and the street setback. Yes.
Okay. Very
and
good.
that's one application. Yes.
All right. So that's from Article Roman 9, Section 175-64A1 and 175-64A4. And in order to be granted the variance, we have to demonstrate that, number one, the variance would not be contrary to the public interest, because, as is noted in the zoning handbook for officials, November 2019, for the variance to be contrary to the public interest, it must, quote, unduly and to a marked degree violate the basic zoning objectives of the ordinance. And to determine this, the handbook suggests you ask the question, does the variance alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, and general welfare of the public? So I looked at the purpose of the shorefront residential district, which reads, the purpose of the district is to maintain the integrity of the existing shorefront residential district and to protect the shorefront from overdevelopment. Further, the town recognizes the importance of implementing water quality protection standards in order to protect the shorelands within the town of Wolfeboro, since they are among the most valuable and fragile natural resources, and that the protection of these shorelands is essential to maintaining the integrity and the exceptional water qualities. So I submit to the zoning board that the construction of a 10-foot to 10.8 foot wide by a 10-foot long mudroom addition with a 1-foot overhangs to an existing home that will now be used as a year-round home would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, nor would it threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. In fact, this parcel and the roadway and the garage lot, as I mentioned, are being depicted as one on the tax map. So this mudroom is being requested because the landowner has moved here permanently and would like to enter the home to remove coats and shoes, which are not typically needed in a summer home. This mudroom was to be incorporated into the garage, but when we realized that it was not a single lot, that the mudroom became necessary. As part of this application, we will be installing stormwater mitigation where none presently exists. We will be replacing an existing non-state approved individual sewage disposal system with a state approved septic system that pre-treats the effluent, and both of which will enhance the surface and groundwater quality. Number two, the spirit of the ordinance is observed. And as the handbook says, one way to ascertain this is to ask whether granting the variance would violate the basic zoning objectives, is to examine whether it would change the essential character of the locality. As I've just demonstrated, I don't think that this variance would alter the essential character of the locality. Another approach the handbook suggests is to determine whether granting the variance would violate the basic zoning objectives, is to determine whether granting it would threaten the health, safety, or public welfare. And again, as demonstrated above, we believe that this would not threaten the public health, safety, or general welfare. And constructing the mudroom along with the associated stormwater mitigation and installation of a new sewage disposal system would not only not threaten it, but will likely enhance it. Number three, substantial justice is done. As the handbook says, perhaps the only guiding principle here is that the loss to the individual that is not outweighed by a gain to the general public is an injustice. And it is our position that denial of this requested variance would result in a loss to the property owner that is not outweighed by the general public. Therefore, a substantial justice would be done by granting this variance. Number 4, values of surrounding properties would not be diminished because it is our position that granting the requested variance would increase the subject parcel's value, which typically results in having no negative impact on abutting properties and oftentimes increasing abutting property values. Improvements for stormwater mitigation where none presently exist will enhance the groundwater and surface water, which will have a neutral or positive effect on abutting properties. For these reasons, we feel that granting the variance will not result in a diminution of surrounding property values. And number 5, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship because of the special conditions of this property that distinguish it from other properties similarly zoned. And the special conditions that distinguish this property from others similarly zoned is its relationship to the surface waters and its relationship to the end of a roadway. This lot is only 6,690 square feet in size and is at the end of the road that only pedestrians occasionally travel on. All outward appearances to an outsider are that this lot and the roadway and the garage lot are all one lot, just as they're shown on the tax map. And it was only a survey that revealed that they were one thing, one lot, 2 separate lots, excuse me. So owing to those special conditions that I just mentioned, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the purposes of the ordinance applicable to this application and the specific application of those provisions to the property. And as the handbook says, to answer this question, the board should ask themselves, is the restriction on the property necessary in order to give the full force and effect of the purpose of the ordinance, or can relief be granted to this property without frustrating the purpose of the ordinance? And is the full application of this ordinance to this particular property necessary to promote a valid public purpose? So once we know the purpose of the ordinance, the property owner needs to establish that because of the special conditions of the property, application of this ordinance provision to this property would not advance the purpose of the ordinance in any, quote, fair and substantial way. So as I stated above, the purpose of the ordinance was to maintain the integrity of the existing shorefront residential and protect the shorefront from overdevelopment. Further, the town recognizes the importance of implementing the water quality protection standards in order to protect the shorelands within the town of Wolfeboro, since they are among the most valuable and fragile natural resources, and that the protection of these shorelands is essential to maintain the integrity and exceptional quality of the waters. So it is my opinion that there is no fair and substantial relationship that exists between the purpose of the ordinance that is applicable to this application and the specific application of the provisions to this property. And this is because the property was created and developed prior to the adoption of the zoning ordinance, and as such, the lot is severely undersized. Because the home is existing and wholly non-conforming, except for the very small 40 to 50 square foot section that I showed. Matt, am I still sharing the screen?
Jim, I took you off screen share so we could see you present. Sorry about that.
Well, that's all right. I just I just wanted to show the very tiny conforming section of this lot. Can I do that, or?
Jim, I'm sharing it back with you. You should have presenter ability in just a second here.
Okay.
There we go.
So it's this little box right here is the only part that complies with the zoning ordinance. So you can shut me off again, Matt. But so that 40 to 50 square foot area in the middle of the home, any addition would result in a greater nonconformity with either road front, waterfront, or side yard setback, creating the need for a variance. Since the owner plans or has moved here full time, she is seeking the mudroom based upon the configuration of the home, and it seemed that a small addition that was no closer to the lake than the existing structure, but closer to the right-of-way, was a more sensible approach and more in keeping with the purposes of the ordinance. And the proposed use is a reasonable one because a mudroom is a reasonable convenience in a year-round home. So therefore, this request is a reasonable one. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board or the public may have.
I'm going to open the public hearing. Are there any members of the of the public that have any comments, questions, concerns?
Mr. Chair, I just want to state for the record that I did, and I know I do see Jeff, I think, wants to make some comments, but I did want to state for the record that I did receive some input on this case initially. However, I received subsequent emails and written correspondence sort of reflecting the fact that with the amended plans, many of those concerns have been addressed. So ultimately, I did not share the initial input from the abutters with the board. If the board feels uncomfortable with that, I'm certainly welcome to share that input, but I believe some of those abutters will be on the call this evening to speak to their satisfaction or not with the proposed use and structure.
Thank you, Matt.
Luke, this is Sarah. Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
I went down and looked at this place this afternoon, and if you look at your map, right where it would be on the right-hand side of the house as it faces Fern Avenue. Right at the corner of the house, there is a set of 3 or 4 steps up with a little cover over it. And looking at the point for, it ends up being, 4.8 inches, that this mudroom will be away from that right of way. And I just wondered why they never considered using this existing entryway with the steps and everything, which is set back quite some distance from the road instead. And this doorway and those 3 steps up, and the steps go all the way around the platform, is directly across from the garage, such that it would not be any less convenient by, any great standards than having it over on that other end of the house where it's virtually in the right of way. And it appears that abutters were very excited about keeping that right of way actually free, and the garage has been moved back purposely 20 feet as a result of that.
Jim, do you want to address it?
Yeah, so I believe that this is the area that Sarah's speaking about. Sarah, you were speaking about in the L itself?
No, if you see the corner of the house where they are proposing to put the mudroom and go directly to your right and back down to the edge of the house, you will see where it says wood steps, and there is an arrow going to these big wide wood steps.
Yes.
Right at the corner of the house.
Yes. I see
I'm
that.
happy to.
So Beth Baldwin is also on here. It sounded as though she wanted to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Beth?
Hi, and thank you for looking at the plans and spending the time. I very much appreciate it. That entryway has never been a useful entryway. It has potted plants in front of it. So however grand it may look with that staircase, it ends up not being near the kitchen. It has steps then back down into the house. So as I get older, I don't want to be going upstairs and downstairs. I want the garage as close to the house as possible, right? Leaving the road open so people can walk down there. Yeah, and I want to be able to walk from the garage into the house. And the best way for me would be to come directly in. I mean, this extension also allows me to do a couple of other things. There's a bulkhead there that you can see, the little square. I would like to integrate that into the house so that you don't have to go outside and shovel out the bulkhead in order to be able to access the basement. I also want to move the oil burner. I mean, this isn't in the plan, but that's the reason why there's that extra piece there, is to accommodate some other things that are part of doing a remodel of the house. I'm planning to remodel the kitchen and bring it up to date because it's 30 years old. And so anyway, I hope I've addressed that question.
Thank you, Beth. Sarah, is that, do you have any more questions on that particular issue?
No more questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public that like to speak, either in favor or against?
I have a question. I'm not a member of the public, but you want to take that now or you want to take it at deliberation?
Let's do a deliberation. I got Jeff here now. I think, Jeff, do you want to speak?
Yeah, just for a second. We're the immediate abutters with the well in question. I did just have a question about the bulkhead, so thanks for addressing that, Beth. I wasn't sure if that was going to go into the road or to the side. And I think it's just a recognition that that is a public area there, so that with the garage and with the mudroom, that be respected as such with no impediments, and that people are free to walk down to that area. Because for us, that's the only access, legal access to the water. We have a right of way in front with our neighbors on the other side. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Beth a question.
Okay.
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 Audrey?
Do you have, is it a full basement in this existing structure?
No, it's a crawl space. I mean, it's a sizable, is it like a cement basement, like with stuff in there?
Well,
It's
is
real-
it high enough that you can stand up in it, or is it more of a, like you say, a crawl space?
Well, a person has to crouch in it. Yeah, it's more than a crawl space, but it's not a standing up space.
And is it a concrete foundation or
Yes, it
something
is.
else?
It's concrete.
That's all the questions I have for Beth at this time.
Are any members of the public before we go into the board? Any members of the public that would wish to speak? Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll, board members, questions?
Yeah, I do. My concern is, under the 5 criteria, if there's any other alternative use, and I think that Sarah pointed out one. I'm not clear on what the other one might have been on the side of the house. And my concern also is plowing, even though it's a private plow job. I'm sure that 4 inches from the edge of the road is going to create a problem. And also, I don't see that there isn't another alternative. We here in New England are pretty hardy souls, and not all of us have enclosed entries. In fact, the entry that Sarah pointed out, in and of itself, could have some sort of enclosure, even if it was a roof and 3-sided over those steps. So I'm not convinced that that this is going to meet the 5 criteria.
Well, when I was there today, I saw a number of cars parked in what looks like it would have been the Fern Avenue itself. And I'm assuming that was from people from this property kind of parking where they always have, thinking it was their property. But certainly, if we're going to consider, a variance
There was
that
a car
close to
parked in the
property
road?
line,
Or in front of the cottage, in front of the shed in the back.
well,
The road is
it was closer to the road, but I don't really think there's enough room to park next to the shed without actually being in the road. And there were a couple of cars, so I'm assuming that
they're not in the
if
road.
the garage and the mudroom is built, there'll be no parking in Fern Avenue.
Well,
Excuse me,
you're absolutely correct,
did Luke
because that,
close the public hearing? Because if he did, then there can be no other input.
I did it. If we're gonna have specific questions for the property owner or for Jim Ryan, we can address those certainly. But let's try to keep it to the board members speaking right now and discussing amongst ourselves. And if we have particular questions, we can certainly address the individuals. So Audrey, you were speaking.
I guess my question is there parking allowed along that right of way right now, or is it just the
No,
traffic that's permitted?
It's the road. So now that we know where the road is, I thought the road was further to the left. And so now we have it, you know, we have the posts and the stakes and everything in there. We know exactly where the road is. I am not parking in the road. Nobody's parking in the road. The neighbors have made it very clear they don't want anybody parking in the road. And I've done the best I can to pull my cars off the road. Now I know where the road is. So they're not in the road. I know it's hard to see where the road is because there are trees growing in it, but they're not. I promise you, my cars are not in the road.
My larger question is, do other people bring cars down the road and use that for vehicles?
I'm the only person.
Private.
I'm the only person who uses the road at that pace, except with a car, right? So my car, my kids bring their cars down, etc. But in terms of walking, the neighbors walk down the road, and they are very clear that they want the road open, and I understand that. I would have loved to have built the garage on top of the road. That would have been the most environmental solution, but that's not a possibility. So I'm trying to get the garage and the house as close as possible. I mean, I'm hardy, don't get me wrong, but when it's minus 20 degrees, I want the garage and the house as close as possible because that wind comes whipping around and it's cold. I've been here every weekend for 2 winters now. I know exactly what it's like. And that's why I'm trying to get those things close together. I'm not trying to obstruct the road for anybody. I'm not. In fact, it's very clear where it is. I'm just trying to improve my property and put a new septic system in and get those things as close as possible so I don't freeze to death trying to get from one to the other in January. And so I don't have to go up 3 stairs and down 3 stairs. I want to go on the same level. More important as I get older, as part of the plan too. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Okay.
Look, we need to stick to the 5 criteria.
Okay. We'll start with the variance will not be contrary to the public interest because does someone want to tackle that?
This is Sarah. I'd like to comment on that one. I'm not totally comfortable with that particular question because I'm still concerned about the 5 inches away that the mudroom would be. And I clearly see that if there's going to be a lot of renovation going on in this building, that perhaps that 3 steps up, 3 steps down could be handled during the renovation because it did seem to be concern from abutters about access through this right of way that has been granted, I guess, for quite some time.
Okay.
I don't see that.
Suzanne, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Audrey. It's okay.
I don't see the language that talks about the setback to that right of way. I see the distances that both the garage and the mudroom are, but is that an actual setback from a private road, or is that something else?
Yes, it is.
The
it is a setback.
Okay.
Audrey, it is a setback.
What is the
from
setback?
So it's treated as a front setback in that area. So based on that,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. Will give me 1 second. But based on that, the front setback would be a 30-foot setback.
Alrighty, thank you.
Okay,
Suzanne?
yep.
Can't access the meeting.
Yeah, well then, on number one, about the variance would be not contrary to the public interest and within the spirit of the ordinance. I think that when we were doing the master plan, it was clear that one of the goals was to try and protect the area from overdevelopment. And even though it's a small mudroom, it certainly adds to the congestion of that particular location. And I think that given also that there is the possibility of another location, may not be as convenient, but certainly would not add to that congested spot. So I will not vote in favor of number one. And actually, we usually do 1 and 2 together. So, because they are so similar, and 2 speaks to the spirit of the ordinance. And the ordinance certainly has a different setback, road front setback, which it can't physically be met, but I don't think we have to exasperate that setback. If we were talking 4 feet, it might be more helpful, but what did Sarah say, 4 inches?
4.8.
I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. I'm gonna tend to agree with both what Sarah said and Suzanne. And is there anyone else that wants to speak to those 2 issues from a different standpoint, Tim or Audrey?
I can make a comment. If you look at where the mudroom is, if you remove it to the right and back a little bit, as Jim pointed out, it would be less of an encroachment on the existing setbacks. You keep the same setback to the street. To put it in between the actual building and the wood arbor and have the entrance that way. I know it's not going to cover the bulkhead as the applicant would like, but I would have no problem agreeing to that if it was in between the wood arbor and the existing house.
Well, we don't get to make that decision. We have to act on what's
I
presented.
understand. I'm just saying,
So
where it stands now, I'm tending to agree with you. However, there are other options.
I think we're saying that too. I think that clearly what Sarah said was that there are other options. And it's not maybe not exactly what she laid out, but there are other options. Could put it in a better situation.
Yeah.
So I make a motion to deny number 1 and 2 because they do not meet the spirit of the ordinance and the public interest, given our discussion on the congestion of that particular location.
Are you suggesting we're voting individually on the criteria?
Sorry?
I would
Are
not
you making a
recommend
motion to vote individually on the?
Yeah, I would not recommend voting individually on each criteria, but based on what's proceeding right now, I would recommend that each member at least indicate their preference on each of the criteria, but I would not recommend a vote on each criteria.
Okay.
So I agree. It looks like there might be 1 or 2 other locations that could be workable, potentially.
Luke, this is Sarah. I would agree that there is I think there are other alternatives. I'm not certain I would be wildly in favor of something that is even closer to the water by putting it by the arbor, but I I think there are other locations where it could be moved where it is much further than 5 inches away. And that's it for me.
Okay.
Mr.
That
Chairman.
covers 1 and 2. I think everyone's spoken on 1 and 2, what their position is. So
Mr.
let's move on.
Chairman.
Yes,
I know public interest is, input is closed, but I just have one, I think, fairly critical point to share with the board that
Okay.
they should be aware. May I?
go ahead, Jim.
So
Well, now
the,
you have to do a poll of the membership. We want to open it again or not.
Matt,
Mr. Chairman, I would just poll the membership that is in fact in keeping with common practice for the board. So a simple show of support for opening public comment again.
you all in favor of opening public comment?
Yes, aye.
Audrey, are you in favor?
Yes.
Sarah?
Reluctantly, yes.
Okay, Suzanne?
Limited to specific point, period.
Okay, and Luke?
Yes.
It seems that all members are in favor then of hearing some public comment as long as it's responsive to specific points.
Can I make a comment
It
to
is.
that, though? If a public comment is allowed to be given, then any other public should be allowed to comment on the comment. So I don't believe we can just take one comment.
I agree.
I can't control what anybody else will say, but I will tell you that the relocation, if you look on the plan, we have to have room for a septic tank. And unless we put the septic tank closer to the, am I shared, Matt?
You are not shared, Jim. Let me hand it back over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So we're talking, I mean, there's been discussion about there's alternatives. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like we're just, Tim had mentioned something about over here, which puts it closer to the lake, which I don't know if that's consistent with the ordinance. And over here, where I think Sarah and Suzanne were speaking about, we have a septic tank and pump chamber here. And those have to be 5 feet from the foundation. And so we would start moving this, and they're supposed to be, away from the boundary lines as well. So we're starting to not have room for that. And that's the reason it wasn't just here. And so I just want the board to be aware of this little spot here is the conforming one. This keeps it further from the lake, and moving it here forces this tank over here closer to the neighbor's well. We were just trying to, there's so many things we're trying to balance, and that was the reason. Plus that 0.4 feet is from the overhang, so the wall is going to be 1.4 feet away. So I just wanted the board to know that as they were acting on that, or giving their consensus on that point, and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any other public input before I close this again? And I want to keep it specific to points 1 and 2 right now. You see none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we're going to go back to the deliberations and back to number 3, substantial justice is done because,
Luke?
yes, Suzanne?
Yeah, just to clarify where I was coming from of the front steps. Not necessarily does it have to be a mudroom in the full sense of the term, a place to hang your coat and drop your shoes. If you take those front steps and enclose them in a typical New England fashion with a shed type roof and 4 posts, glass storm door on either side, You've got an enclosure that gives you the protection like a airlock to go into your house. So what I'm saying is there is another alternative. It does not have to be a mudroom per se to give you the enclosed enclosure from the weather. That's what I was trying to show as an alternative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Luke,
Yes.
may I speak? Yes, I just want to point out, I appreciate what Jim is saying, but I maybe don't necessarily, have a design in mind, but that the substantial concrete 3 steps up entryway there, which I think could easily be utilized in some form. And if renovations are going on in the house, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that perhaps that those steps could in some way be enclosed. And perhaps, I mean, I have a mudroom per se in my house, but that mudroom is like built into my house off of my porch. It's not totally external. I just think that there are other alternatives here. And I cannot imagine someone plowing down that street and actually staying within that right of way and not damaging the corner of that house, or either that or greatly diminishing the size of the right of way because you just don't have enough physical area to move.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Let's tackle the rest of the criteria here. So we can get through this. Substantial justice is done. Someone want to tackle that? I mean, based on what
I'll tack.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the justice to the owner is not outweighed by the justice to the public. The public, that's a dead end street. There's no turnaround. It'd have to use private property to turn around. I don't think it's in the public interest that to allow that mudroom to go so close to the road is in the public interest and good planning.
Okay. And number 4, the values of surrounding properties will not be diminished because, I mean, based on what I've heard from the board, there seems to be, it's a very small, narrow entryway down to the lake for the abutters, for the people that live on the road. But that's their only access to the lake. And as Sarah has brought up a couple times now, if plowing was to commence down there with the structure being so close to the road, it would be very difficult. And so with that, I think that it does not meet that criteria either. That it wouldn't necessarily diminish the property values, but it's going to certainly make it look much more narrow. And it is a spot that allows others to access the lake for themselves. So I do feel there could be areas the taxpayer could get there, what they're looking for, and not have it be so close to the right of way. So that's my interpretation. Number 5, does someone want to take number 5? Literal enforcement of the ordinance result in unnecessary hardship.
Happy.
I think someone has a dog barking.
Number 5, the special conditions that distinguish this property from others. I would say that many of the properties at that end of the avenue are in a similar situation. I don't see that it's distinguished or different that sets it apart, other than it is at the dead end, and that is not an asset, that's a negative.
Any other comments on this? If not, I entertain a motion at this point. No more discussion.
Mr. Chairman, could I confer with my client before you take an action?
Oh,
That means we have to open a public hearing again.
I just want to confer before you take a vote in case she wishes to withdraw this application, so that in the event she wants to retool it, as Audrey pointed out, I don't know what a material change would be that would not, I don't want her to be precluded from coming back with something that was different.
so
If
irregular.
it's different, then I think you could come back.
Okay, as long as the board is comfortable with that, I didn't want to preclude her from coming back with something that instead of 4/10 of a foot was, 4 feet, and be prohibited from doing that because it was essentially the same thing.
We-
In my
you
opinion, sorry.
You don't get a second bite of the apple.
That's why I was asking if I could speak to my client.
I disagree with that. If they come back with another proposal that's, say, on the lakeside that needs a different variance, or within that L that needs a variance, they're moving towards what they're addressing the issues we had, but they would still need variances. It's a different application if they move the construction from one area to another.
You misunderstood my point, and you clarified it yourself with what you just said. As long as it's a different application for the mudroom in a different circumstance, yes, I'm saying the same bite of the apple would be in the same place, only instead of 4 feet, it would be 5 feet. That's the same bite of the apple. If they come back with something in another location,
I would
that's
agree with
not
that.
the same.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
I've conferred with my client, and we would withdraw if that's acceptable. This one application.
Matt,
I am a bit uncomfortable with withdrawal at this point in the process. I'm not sure that matches with the board's procedure in the past. Quite honestly, I'm not sure I've been part of a hearing where this has happened. So I'll defer to the board, but I do concur with both Audrey and Suzanne's comments about bites of the apple and substantial difference in application. But I think I'm guessing that what the applicant is seeking to do is potentially change the dimension of the current proposed request. So it's ultimately up to the board what you'd like to do. But I think withdrawal at this point is just a little bit, it's a bit late in the process for that.
I'm ready to make a motion.
go ahead, Suzanne.
I move that we deny the request for the mudroom for the Baldwin Trust. I don't have the number in front of me.
Case
On-
7v20 or 6v20, Suzanne, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. 6v20. That we deny for the reasons stated that we went through on 1 through 5.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
And second
Yeah.
that.
Is there any discussion on Suzanne's motion? Okay, all in favor? Matt, wants a roll call?
Certainly. I'll start with Tim Cronin.
Aye.
And again, an aye represents a motion to the denial. Audrey Klein.
Yes, aye.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
Yes,
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes,
Thank you, Suzanne, and Luke Freudenberg.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. The motion passes unanimously to deny.
Okay.
Can we move on, please? Tim?
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one quick comment?
Yes.
I'll be very brief. I apologize. Jim pointed out that the applications are a bit oddly formatted, and this specifically applies to cases 7 and 8. These two applications were submitted as one application to the board by the applicant being on the same lot. However, our office broke the applications up to a permitted use variance and a dimensional variance. But you'll probably notice that the materials in your package, including the references to the answers to the criteria, are identical. As a result, what I would recommend to the board is that you read both cases into the record and hear them at the same time, but ultimately act on case number 7 first, which is the permitted use. And based on the bearing of that vote, we'll decide whether or not you even vote on case number 8. Does that make sense to the board? So read them into the record together,
Yeah,
listen to the criteria together, open the public hearing together, but ultimately vote on case 7 first.
Okay,
That makes sense.
Yes,
Yes.
Next case is tax map 149-006, case number 07V20, applicant Beth Baldwin Trust, public hearing for a variance under section 175-65 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the construction of a detached garage without a dwelling unit or habitable space on a lot where no primary structure exists within the shorefront residential district. It's located at 8 Fern Avenue, along with tax map 149-006, case number 08-V-20, applicant Beth Baldwin Trust, public hearing for a variance under 175-64A1 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the construction of a detached garage within the front setback of the Shoreline Residential District. Also, this property is at 8 Fern Avenue.
Okay, thank you. Matt, could you share the screen again? I just,
Yep, Jim, I'll make you the presenter right now. You should be all set. Go ahead.
okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so again, this is now for what we call the garage lot. And there is no primary use on this lot. So therefore we need a variance for an accessory use without a primary use. As I said, the owner is willing to put in a deed restriction that these two parcels can never be sold separately. There is already an existing accessory structure on this lot without a primary structure. So it is sort of consistent the way the property has been used. I've more or less gone over the presentation before, but I think that Matt, were you thinking that I would present the information for both cases, but they act on them separately, or try to break it out?
Jim, my thought was, and ultimately it's the board's decision, but I think because the criteria responses are the same, and I believe that's the case, that you could present the criteria one time and the board could ultimately take action on them separately.
Okay. So I'll speak to both the request of having an accessory structure with no primary. As I said, we would put a deed restriction. They could never be sold separately, so that it would effectively be as though they were one, with the exception that they don't own the fee here and people have the right to cross. As I mentioned before, they also want to put in a new sewage disposal system. And so we are proposing the primary, a new clean solution septic system, which is a pretreatment system, targeting here, which ends up being no closer than 56.2 feet from the lake and 56.2 feet from the neighbor's well. And these wetlands, we have reduced setbacks of 15.6. Not part of the variance, but just so you understand what's driving this. and 23.4 to very poorly drained. And so the height of the groundwater table and the fill associated with that forces the garage to be toward the road, and then the road, and as well as trying to keep away from this well, and then the garage trying to keep the neighbors, respect their concerns. Got this at 20 feet so that if the garage is full, vehicles can park here. This will be an H20 rated tank so that a vehicle or H20 components, so a vehicle could park on these if necessary, maintaining this as wide open. That's the idea behind the design here. I will now go through the criteria that is related to both, and it's, I know you have a long agenda. I'll try to be more brief. You all have the document that I've submitted, but number one is the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. And as the handbook says, you have to decide if it's going to violate the basic objectives of the zoning ordinance. I've discussed what the objectives are, and I would submit that the zoning board, that the construction of a 30 by 24 foot garage with 1 foot overhangs on this existing property would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, nor would it threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. In fact, this parcel, as I mentioned, on the tax map, is shown as 1. Because the owner is willing to put a deed restriction on that it could never be sold separately, it would effectively be acted as 1. This garage is being requested because the landowner has now moved here permanently, and as such would like to have a garage to store her vehicles, her boat, and other tools and equipment. As I mentioned, it was going to be an attached garage until we learned what we've learned. An argument can be made that given the longer duration of vehicle storage now, and that an enclosed garage, having it there rather than on the existing ground, would provide greater protection to the surface water and groundwater by containing any salts or greases or oils that might drip from any of the vehicles. Also, it would be more aesthetically pleasing to have interior storage of all of this equipment rather than out on the ground. Further, the purpose of the ordinance, the landowner will be installing a state-approved sewage disposal system, which would improve the groundwater quality and stormwater mitigation as part of the shoreland permitting where none exists today. So that's number one. Number two, the spirit of the ordinance is observed. And again, the handbook suggests that you have to decide if it's going to threaten the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, and installing a new sewage disposal system, stormwater mitigation, and creating interior vehicle and storage equipment would not threaten the public health, safety, or welfare, and would likely enhance it. Number three, substantial justice is done because it is our position that the denial of the variance would result in a loss to the property owner that is not outweighed by any gain to the public if the applicant were denied the ability to build a garage. So therefore, substantial justice is done. Number four, surrounding property values will not be diminished, and that is because it is our position that the variance would increase the subject parcel's value, which typically results in no negative impact on abutting properties and oftentimes increases abutting property values. Also increasing the aesthetics by indoor storage of vehicles and equipment and improvements in the groundwater and surface water also have a neutral or positive effect on property values. Therefore, the granting of the requested variances will not result in a diminution of surrounding property values. Number five, the literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship because of the special conditions of this property that distinguish it from other properties similarly zoned. In this instance, the special circumstances are the lot's location in relationship to surface waters, its relationship, the end of a road, the geometry of the lot, and the position of the abutters pre-August 20th, 1989 drinking water well and the surrounding wetlands. This lot lies across the road from the house lot and is at the end of the road that generally only pedestrians occasionally travel on. And because of this, the roadway and the roadway from the easterly portion of the property boundaries to the water is only about 100 feet. This is what I'm not shared again, am I, Matt? All right, I guess he's gone.
Oh, no, sorry, Jim. I had it on mute and I was talking to myself. I will share it with you right now. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. So what I was speaking to is this is only about 100 feet through here. All outward appearances to an outsider unfamiliar with this is that this is all one property. Due to the use of the property on both sides, the lack of the defined travel surface and ground cover, it was not until we did the boundary survey that we realized it. So those are the special conditions that exist, and owing to those special conditions, it is our opinion that there is no fair and substantial relationship between the existing purpose of the ordinance, which is applicable to this application, and that the specific application of this provision to this property would result in application to this. Let me start over. And is our position that there is no fair and substantial relationship that exists between the purpose of the ordinance applicable to this application and the specific application of those provisions to this property. This is because the parcel was created prior to the adoption of zoning, and as such, the lot is undersized. It also has the abutting and on-site wetlands, the August 20th, 1989 well in this location, and setbacks that severely restrict the building envelope. For these reasons, in order to design and install the most compliant septic system and garage to the greatest, we maximize to the greatest extent practicable the setback to the effluent disposal area, to the surface water in the abutter's well, and then we'll be seeking waivers from the wetland, which forces the garage to be closer to the roadway than is required. And the use is a reasonable one because the ordinance allows for the construction of lots with development of a home and a garage for up to 1,400 square feet, and we're only seeking this 30 by 24. Since garages are often used on residential year-round properties, we felt that this was a reasonable use. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions the board or the public may have.
And Jim, I have a question. Is the garage a one-story? Are there any plans to put anything above it?
No, it is a one-story.
I'll open the public meeting.
Luke, may I ask Jim a question?
Sure.
Jim, can you explain how this septic system is different, this clean solution system portion and the individual sewage disposal system, how that is different from a regular septic tank and a leach field?
Yes. So Sarah, the clean solution is an aerobic system, whereas a conventional is an anaerobic. So you introduce air, and there is material in there that allows more bacteria to grow on the the material that's inside the aeration chamber that aerates it, and it sends out clarified effluent that in some states they have allowed for even surface treat or surface disposal or spraying. In New Hampshire, their approval is that they get a substantially reduced footprint because the diminished amount of bacteria in the sewage doesn't create the biological mat that is typical in a anaerobic or conventional septic system, and therefore it's a treated effluent that goes into the water, and the ground accepts it much more rapidly. It's more like just pouring water on the ground or into the ground rather than sewage, which creates a biological mat.
Thank you. And I think this is a great idea because of the sensitivity of this particular area.
Thank you, Sarah.
Agreed.
I have a question, maybe for Matt. Since discovering this is a separate lot that pre-exists zoning, essentially, would not a regular dwelling unit be permitted?
Yes, Audrey, that's the case. A single family dwelling permit could be pulled for this lot being a separate lot of record.
Jim, did you consider a forced main and putting the tank across the street at all? Was that an option instead of putting it near the house where you might want to use that area to build to extend the house? Oh, you're muted, I think.
We didn't consider that. We didn't, Audrey, do that for a couple of reasons. The clean solutions requires yet another tank, and if we grind it and send ground solids over, then the tank has to be doubled. So now we're starting to dramatically increase all of the tanks, and we'd have to put those tanks closer to the abutter's well, and we started to fear we were going to run out of room.
And another question from Matt. Is there setbacks to the wet area that I see that the garage is hanging over? And is that a ZBA issue, or is that for the planning board for, conditional use type thing? Or
so encroachment into the setback or buffer of a wetland are subject to special use permitting from the planning board. So I think, as Jim mentioned in the application and as part of his initial presentation, this project would be subject to permitting through the planning board subsequent to this approval if it is granted.
Matt, the Conservation Commission still continues to review special use permits, do they not?
They do review special use permits, Sarah, yes.
Are those, is that special use still applicable to this being a pre-existing lot of record?
Yes, it is.
Any other questions at this point? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing.
I had one comment. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I had a question and a couple of comments. I guess the first, and again, I'm Jeff Paczynski, the immediate neighbor. What is the purpose of the ordinance that prohibits a garage on a lot without a primary use? That's just hopefully it's a quick question, but.
So Jeff, just to clarify, it's a kind of a broader concept than that. It prohibits all accessory structures on lots, whether it be a garage, a tennis court, a boathouse, or a similar structure. I wasn't here when the ordinance was adopted, but these provisions are fairly common, and generally they're just intended to ensure that building lots are sort of built whole, in that the single family dwelling unit is actually accompanied by the accessory structure. I'm not sure what the specific basis was for that adoption in the town of Wolfeboro, I'd be happy to look into it and get back to you, but I can't speak to it in any more detail than that. I'm sorry about that.
No, that was a really thorough answer. Thanks. And there's a couple of comments that just in response to what Mr. Rhines had said. I'm concerned with the size of the garage, and that it is going to essentially alter the character of the neighborhood. There's already a shed on that property. It is a wooded lot, so aesthetically right now it is actually pleasing. And I don't think there's any gain to the general public. There certainly is to the homeowner for sure. I could understand wanting a garage, living there year round. But I do not think a 24 by 30 foot garage is going to increase our property value and the amount of trees it's going to take down right on that side of our cottage as well. There also are quite a number of pedestrians that walk down to the end of the road. So it's to say that it's very occasional. I just want to point out that quite a few people do like to use it during the summer. And the longstanding neighbors know that's a road. That's never appeared to be one property. That we're aware of the public access to the road. So but that was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment?
Sure.
So I understand Mr. Paczynski's comment, but as Audrey pointed out, Beth could just as easily build an 1,800 square foot house on the property intrusive than what's being requested. So the fact that it complies with the 15-foot side yard setback, I just want the board to be aware of that. And I know the neighbors are sensitive about the fact that people outside of the neighborhood look at that and think, gee, this is one piece of property. They may have realized it, but anybody that isn't from that neighborhood would not realize it going down there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing so we can move to the board. Board members, questions, comments? Review the criteria. We'll start with, you can start with number one.
I think this is actually a plus, given that they're willing to tie those two pieces of plots together for eternity. That's a real benefit.
Can we do 1 and 2 together?
Absolutely.
The variance will not be contrary.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The variance will not be contrary to the public interest, and the spirit of the ordinance is observed. Actually, this improves the public interest. They're mindful of the wetlands. They're mindful of the type of septic system that they're putting in. And it protects the spirit of the ordinance as well, because in fact, as pointed out, as Audrey pointed out, there could be a house put in there. And so this is the less detrimental to the area and less harmful to the land. So the spirit of the ordinance would be observed in that case.
Thank you. Number 3, substantial justice is done because, and I think the exact same points are to be outlined for that one. I mean, there's so many more things that can be done with the property, and I think the owner is going, doing things the right way, and I think that fits that criteria as well. So that's my opinion on that. The values of the surrounding properties will not be diminished because someone want to tackle that one?
Well, we don't have any testimony one way or the other. I did hear the abutters concerned about the trees being taken down. I'm sure that will be a change in character there, but without official documentation from somebody that's in real estate or some such thing, we have no testimony that the value of the surrounding properties will be harmed. And in fact, it will be to the benefit of the neighborhood not to have a house there, I would think.
Agreed. And number
That's all.
5, okay, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship because, you know, the property is fairly similar to the other ones down there. You know, the special conditions, you know, it's a small lot, and they're not going to be building a house there. They're going to be building a garage instead, tying the 2 lots together for all eternity. I think that's a win-win for the neighbors and for everybody else around there. I think that, you know, it definitely meets that criteria. Any other comments?
I think the special condition is environmental, and that the new sort of septic design they're using is a benefit. And also, I think it's very important to note that the benefit here and what distinguishes this property is it's going to have some stormwater mitigation, and that will be taken care of.
At this point, is there, is there a motion on, this is case number 0807-B-20? Is there a motion on the?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, but I'd like to make some conditions to that motion beyond what the planner has given us. And I believe this is 07. Is this 07? Yeah.
07.
So I would move to approve this garage that is, what was it? 30 by what? Somebody
24.
help here.
24.
20 by 24 by 30.
30.
For the Baldwin property, case number, oh shoot. Case
07
number,
07B20.
oh, yeah, thanks. With the conditions the planner has outlined 1 through 6. But I would like to make it more detailed. I would like to add the condition that there will be a deed restriction that will be recorded at the registry of deeds, that the lot will be not utilized for anything other than the approval that we are given for the garage and the septic system. And that conditioned on the state DES approval and conditioned on the planning board wetlands and the shoreland town and state shoreland protection act and the planning board special use permit. I think I captured them all, but I'd like them spelled out. And Matt, if I've messed up what they're called or how many they were, please correct me, but I would like them itemized and spelled out as condition number 7.
So you'd like the special use permit, the state shoreline permit, the town shoreline permit, the building permit, all of those included as a state, I mean, the state septic approval, Suzanne, I don't think is germane to the application necessarily. I know it's an important part of the testimony tonight, but I really think only the shoreland permits are germane to what.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Wasn't the septic system design going to be a different one than is traditionally approved?
It is. I'm just not certain that there's a logical or connection between the septic system and the proposal for the variance from the permitted use. I know that was a substantial topic of discussion, but I'm just not sure it's germane to the application. I'll defer to the board, but I am a little concerned about that.
Does it do any harm to include it?
No, but I I'm just not sure that it sets a good precedent to include approvals that aren't germane to the application. It's up to the board, but
Okay.
I have some
Well,
concern about it. Because
the
Suzanne,
deed
in the event that they don't move forward with the septic, then would the approval be invalidated from the ZBA? That would be my question as a sort of devil's advocate question.
So in this case, I think not, but I think if we were talking about giving a variance or some leniency to some setbacks to wet areas, we might want to ask somebody to use a better, those higher quality system. But that's not what we're asking in this case.
I would agree. I would agree, Audrey. Yep.
Oh, okay, so then scratch that one off the list, but please make sure that we add the deed restriction that's being offered that will be recorded at the Registry of Deeds so that the planning board also knows that and future residents know that.
Okay, that the lots will not be conveyed separately. Understood.
Right. So, so then the motion was to approve 07V20 for the garages stated by the dimensions and add the plan is 6 requirements for conditions as well as the ones that I just stated and you captured for me.
Okay, I'll go ahead and second that. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, look, I just wanted to go for some clarification here. She's including the dimensions of the garage. Then it's number 7, I guess, would be that deed restriction that the lot cannot be sold individually. Then is number 8, I guess, would be shoreland permits from the state and the town.
And special use permit and plan and board wetlands.
What I would recommend
Yeah,
is a simple amendment to condition number 1 to include Town of Wolfeboro building permit, Town of Wolfeboro shoreland permit, State of New Hampshire shoreland permit, and I believe that was all of them based on what was being proposed. So I would just amend number 1, and I would add a condition number 7 that language be added to the deed indicating that the lots will not be separately conveyed. So it would be conditions 1 through 7. I think that covers everything that Suzanne had mentioned.
Okay.
Thank you. That'd be excellent.
Thank you, Matt, because it's a deal breaker for me if the thing about the deed restrictions for not being able to sell the lots off separately. Because I think the only reason I feel comfortable approving this accessory use on that lot is because it is going to be considered by deed to be an integral part of the one across the street.
Okay.
Understood. And just because I've clarified the conditions to be 1 through 7, I know there's a motion and second here, but it may be worthwhile to amend that motion just for the record, because I think we initially talked about conditions 1 through 8, but now we're talking about 1 through 7.
Okay. All right, I'll amend my motion to say number 1 will be amended. Condition number 1 will be amended to include the itemized list that Matt had read off to us regarding the wetlands and shoreland protection and the planning board, those items that you've reiterated for me. So number 1 will be clarified and itemized. Okay. And then we'll add number 7 with the deed restriction.
Okay, perfect.
Is that okay?
Yep, and I'll still second that. So is there any further discussion?
Very
None,
clear.
roll call.
Tim Cronin.
Approved.
Thank you, Tim. Audrey Klein.
Yes, it's approved.
Thank you, Audrey. Sarah Silk.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you. And Luke.
Yes.
Okay, so that's 5-0 in favor of granting of case 07. Now on to case 08.
Okay,
Thank you
so
very
case-
much.
Matt, on case 08-V-20, the criteria again, or can we just go ahead and base it on the same criteria we just went through for all the same reasons?
I believe that based on what I announced before, I think that you've opened the public hearing on this as well. You've taken testimony about this. The applicant addressed the criteria. These were submitted as one application. I believe you can proceed directly to discussion of the criteria from the board's perspective.
But my question is can I say, and will the board agree that based on the criteria we just discussed on 07-V-20, when we talked about the disposal system and all that, can we just say for the very same reasons we approve this, we need to go through each criteria?
Mr. Chairman, just because the requests are so different, one being a permitted use and one being a dimensional requirement, I think you need to go through them. I understand that time is of the essence with the late night you have, but I think you have to go through it quickly.
No problem. Okay, the variance will not be contrary to the public interest because for many, we'll take 1 and 2, 1 and 2, the same spirit of the ordinance is observed because, and it's not going to alter the character of anything. It's going to improve the stormwater. It's going to improve the land use. It's going to improve with this sewage disposal system. It seems to be pretty state of the art and great for a small lot. So for those 2 reasons, I believe it meets the criteria of both. Substantial justice is done because does someone want to tackle that?
Did you open are we having a public hearing on the variance for the setback?
Suzanne, my opinion had been that because we had read it into the record together, that the public hearing was already opened. Because we had said both were being heard together. Yep.
Okay.
Substantial justice, a garage is a common use and there is no room on this other property for a garage, and this property is tied to the primary use property by the use approval, and so this is a substantial benefit to the landowner, which is not a negative, any unusual negative to the rest of the people on the road.
And the values of the surrounding properties will not be diminished because, and just as we spoke before, there's been no one that spoke against or could, show any evidence that there's going to be a diminishing in property values, and therefore, there's really no reason that would diminish any kind of property values as I see it. Little enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance will result in unnecessary hardship because with the special conditions of this property, it's a similarly zoned property, with surface waters, and it could be used as a house lot instead of using it for a garage. They're rehabilitating the sewage disposal system and updating it. So for those reasons, I think that it certainly meets the criteria outlined there.
I would add to that the special condition is that the existing house lot across the street does not have area for any sort of storage garage.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I entertain a motion.
I would move to approve the variance setback for the garage, which is, the garage is 30 by 24. The front setback is 11 feet from the road boundary of Fern Avenue, and that would be case 08-V-20 Baldwin.
Suzanne, I think that it's 20 feet from the road.
That's Oz. I've got on here, proposed property modification, construct a 30 by 24 garage. Have I got the wrong one? 08, with no residence, 11 feet from a road front boundary line from Fern Avenue.
So
That's
the,
on,
Suzanne, where are you reading that from, just for clarification?
08, your 08 page.
Yeah, so the reason for the discrepancy is that this application was amended. The notice did not change for any reason, but the plan was changed to be a much greater setback from the road. So the
Okay.
plan as proposed is 20 feet. I'm sorry for that issue, but that's what was part of the reason that this application was continued. So it's a 20-foot setback from the road.
Okay, so amend my motion to be 20 feet from the road boundary for an avenue. And with the conditions as outlined by the town planner.
The motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Matt, you want to do the roll?
Sure. Tim Cronin.
Approve.
Thank you, Tim. Audrey Klein is somewhere there. I can see her.
Yep,
She's
approved.
hiding.
Sarah Silk.
Approved, yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Suzanne Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Luke Freudenberg.
Yes.
And that is a 5-0 approval of that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim.
Have a good night.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
point of order to be considered. It's a couple of minutes before 9 o'clock. We still have a full agenda ahead of us. I would like to continue the remainder of the applications. And if it be in not our normal routine of another month, I have no problem with meeting an extra night to do due diligence to the applicants, because there's a lot to get through. And maybe meet in a couple of weeks or a week. I'm open to whatever other night would work for everybody.
If you change that, don't you have to then renotice everybody?
No, we'll continue them to a date certain, whatever everyone
The-
feels they could do.
Matt,
The concern I have is that go ahead.
how many days to renotice, or we don't need to renotice?
The public hearings have not been opened on the application. That's my concern. And technically with those not being opened, I am a little worried about continuing the cases. If the board wants to be procedurally correct, what I would do is open the cases and continue them. It would be sort of an odd remedy. But if you are going to do that, what I would recommend is give at least each of the applicants or their agency opportunity to address their availability for a continued date. I think that's a courtesy that might be extended. And I say that particularly because some of these folks have been on the call for 2 hours, and I just don't know what their availability is in a time period of a week or 2 weeks. That's my only recommendation.
Can I point
Could we
to you, to your agenda?
volunteer to
Suzanne?
Your agenda, Matt, says the board may, this is a posted public agenda. The board may choose to continue unopened application if not opened before 9 p.m. So you're contradicting the instructions that you gave us.
Yeah, and I guess there could be a comment on the language that I use, but my intent there was that if generally the board feels like it will not get through the slated agendas or applications for that evening, I would recommend conferring with the applicants. I mean, if they aren't able to present, then I'm not sure there's a good point in proceeding. But Suzanne, I agree. My language could have been more clear, but I think you should at least consult with them to ensure that they are able to attend a continued hearing. I'm not arguing that you don't have the right to do that. I think you do, but I would just talk to them quickly, perhaps as part of just a public comment period.
Could I
Bruce,
make a
can I-
suggestion?
Go ahead, Audrey, go ahead.
Yep, I would be willing to stay to 10, and I would ask whether any of the applicants would volunteer to be continued, and perhaps we can knock 1 or 2 off in the next hour.
I agree.
Luke?
I'm sorry.
Sarah, sorry.
Yeah, just relative to our continuing, Could I just request that if we do a continuance, that it not be the second Monday of the month, as I have another town board meeting that's always scheduled on the second Monday of the month,
Okay,
out of respect for that board?
okay, no problem.
Thank you.
So Matt, what do you think the best way to do the public hearing and ask the,
What I would recommend is adjusting the agenda to put the public comment period, or to create a public comment period basically, and allow the remaining applicants who are on to speak to their availability. It's a bit of an odd circumstance. I did contact a few of the applicants, or one of the applicants that's on the call still, but I think they should be given an opportunity in open session to discuss their availability with the board.
Okay.
And it's
First is
an odd circumstance.
first, let's establish the fact is, are the rest of the members of the board, as Audrey stated, willing to do another hour? Let's just get that out there. Or do we, so, Tim,
Yes.
what are your feelings? And Suzanne?
No, because I don't think we can give full attention and do justice to the applicant. I think that you get tired and you get, your brain gets bogged down.
Matt, I have a question for you. I think it was last month when we were talking about case 09 SE 20. Is that something that is planning to be done next month or in a year or two? That's pretty far out, correct?
So the 09 SE 20 is it's a complicated application in the sense that there are grant timelines involved, and I don't want to advocate in either direction, but that is a town-owned property. There's time sensitivity, yes, but I don't think that should have too much bearing on whether the decision is made, particularly because I think all applicants can claim that their request is time sensitive. So I'd be very cautious with using that kind of criteria to make a determination. And quite frankly, I wouldn't use that criteria to shuffle applications around. I would be equitable with whatever action you take this evening, unless an applicant is willing to voluntarily continue.
Yeah, I mean, what I was looking at is 3 cases that are left. If there's somebody that's sitting there waiting to issue a contract and put people to work, and we're postponing them, I'll stay till midnight. I don't care.
My response would be this: only one of the applications on the agenda is brand new to the board or 2 of the two applications on the agenda are brand new to the board. The last 2. The Lakes Region Model Railroad Museum, although it was not deliberated at the prior meeting, was submitted and there was an outstanding issue. So shouldn't have any huge bearing on your decision, but I think there are some differences between those remaining 3.
Could I comment on 9 SE 20? The applicant, correct me, Matt, if I'm wrong, but the applicant will be going to the planning board tomorrow night for a site plan review. And I think it would be more than beneficial for this board to have that decision clarified and taken care of before we act. And in fact, I feel that this should have been a joint application so that we both could hear what the other board has to say for pluses and minuses. And so I think it would be to our benefit and to the applicant's benefit for that case to go to the planning board tomorrow, and then we hear that one afterwards. I think it would be far more beneficial. So
Mr. Chairman,
I'm not in favor of staying for these 3.
would you be willing to open a bit of a public session under the other business agenda item just to discuss this? Because I know that one of the applicants has indicated via the chat feature that they are willing to continue. Perhaps we could just discuss this quickly with the applicant, not any material facts of the cases, but whether or not they are willing to wait a period of a week or that some period of time to be determined. Perhaps you could just open a discussion with the applicants under other business.
Okay, let's do that.
Recognizing that the board has the authority to continue all of them, I think it's worthwhile to have a conversation.
Okay, we're gonna try to make this as short as possible so that we can make a decision here. But let's take let's take it case by case and talk to each individual one at a time, correct? Matt?
Yes, that's what I would recommend, yes.
Mr. Sims? Your case would be
Greetings,
next. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the greetings, good evening. We are in a position where we are ready to put shovels in the ground as soon as we get a building permit. So any delay is a delay in starting work. We are running up against a grant deadline with LCHIP at the end of the year. And so I think it's important that we proceed with all due haste, subject to, we could wait a week. I think waiting a month would be very detrimental to the project.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's asking you to wait a month. I think we could I'm hoping that we could get back to this next week if the board agreed on it, that we could pick a night. And
Next
knock
week.
this out.
Next week was what would be fine with me.
Other than next Monday, because
That would
that's, we could do it, you know, other than next Monday, because Sarah's wouldn't be available. So sometime next week. And the next case, I think we have Paige Stockman on here for Paige, are you
Yeah,
on the?
Mr. Stockman is here. Paige, if you could join us for just a second, just to indicate verbally for the record
Hi.
whether or not you're willing to be continued to a meeting next week.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Okay. And finally, we have the applicant Arthur T. and Margot Wood. We have a representative from,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Chris Bolt for the record.
okay.
I'm reaching out to my client to confirm what availability is. We too were very concerned about being pushed out a month. I'm happy to say we have a far more simple project, but we recognize the board's timing constraints. May I say from my other hat that is frequently on the municipal side of life, to continue, you do need to be continuing to a date certain with a live program, a live matter. So I agree with Mr. Sullivan. It is cleanest if you open each for the purpose of coming into the meeting and continuing it then, rather than doing it through the, shall we say, inartful language of the notice on the agenda. That way there's clean. You don't then have to renotice to anybody. It's done the right way per the statutes.
And just to respond to that quickly, if I could, Mr. Chair, I want to amend a comment I made earlier. I don't believe that you do have to open the public hearing, but I agree that you need to read the case into the record, and then the board can take the action. So you don't need to open the public hearing, but the case should certainly be read into the record for everyone to hear, and then the continuance motion can be made.
And I agree with that statement.
Thank you. Okay, so members of the board, before we get to that, is there a date next week that works for everybody? Let's start with next Tuesday, hypothetically.
That works for me.
Matt, is that a bad day? I see your face.
No.
Okay.
I have another ZBA.
Okay.
Yeah, my commitment is to this board. I do have a planning board meeting in Dover where I live, but I'll do whatever the board wants. I'll be here.
Is there a better day of the week that you envision, Matt?
Wednesday next week would work for me. However, I don't know if there will be a select board meeting. So I'm a little concerned about that. Thursday could work for me if others are amenable to that. And I can do Thursday either this week or next week.
Generally, the
Something
Board of
this week?
Selectmen doesn't meet on the second Wednesday of the month. It's first and third.
Sarah, the board has been meeting on a weekly basis over the last 2 months during the COVID public health crisis. So that's my only concern. I would hate to jump in front of them. Yeah, but you're right. Absolutely.
Matt, this coming Thursday, do we have any other takers on that one?
I could do
I'll
Thursday.
go. I can do it.
Are you referring to
I
the
can do
4th or
it.
the 11th, Tim?
The 4th. You just said you're available this Thursday also, right, Matt?
Let me just confirm before I make such bold statements about my calendar. I do have meetings most nights. Let's see. The 4th is my sole free night, so I am free to spend my time with this board.
Good.
And we welcome you.
Thank you so much.
Audrey, are you still there? Did we hear from you?
We need you.
Is the 4th good, Audrey? This Thursday?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, this Thursday's fine. Yep.
Good.
And Mr. Sims, is this Thursday okay with you?
Yes, it is. The following Thursday is not, though.
Okay, okay. And paid, Mr. Stockman, is the 4th of this Thursday good with you?
Yep, that's fine, Luke. Thank you.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Volt? Thursday? good?
Yes, this Thursday works. Next Thursday, I'm at another ZBA meeting.
Okay, okay.
Thursday, the
now-
4th at 7 PM.
So what I would do, just to circle back, I would read each of the cases into the record, Mr. Clerk. The board should then make a motion to continue until Thursday, June 4th at 7 PM with a meeting to be held via GoToMeeting using the same login information as this evening's proceedings.
Okay.
So a motion on
next-
each case. Yep, sorry.
Next item on the agenda is tax map 217-46, case number 09-SE-20, applicant Lakes Region Model Railroad Museum, Inc. Public hearing for special exception under Article 175, Section 92 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for a museum use in a C1 Central Business District. The property is located at 61 Railroad Avenue.
Is there a motion to continue this till Thursday, June 4th at 7 p.m.?
I would move to continue case 09-SE-20 to Thursday, June 4th. The opening meeting is at 7. Virtual meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second,
Second.
okay. Okay, all in favor, Suzanne,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Audrey,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
and myself is a yes. So it's 5-0 to continue that to Thursday, June 4th, virtual meeting at 7 p.m.
Perfect. Okay, next case, tax map 171-19, case number 12-EW-20, applicant Mark G. Wheaton Revocable Trust, paid Stockman. Public hearing for an equitable waiver pursuant to RS 674:33A under the Article 175-80.A2, side setback residential district of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to permit a further encroachment beyond the approved by the zoning board as of its October 7th meeting. This property is located at 102 Key Waden Point Road.
Move to continue case 12-EW-20 of Old Keewaydin Point Road to June 4th, Thursday, 7 o'clock, virtual meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? I'll start with Suzanne,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Audrey,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
myself's a yes. It's 5-0. Finally,
Next case.
Yep.
Next case is tax map 259-34, case number 13-SE-20, applicant Arthur T. and Margot Wood. Public hearing for a special exception under Article 6, Section 175, Section 43A10 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to redevelop and vertically expand an existing garage and attached bunk room collectively known as the garage. This property is located at 72 Oakwood Road.
I'll make the
Move to
motion.
continue,
Go ahead.
move
go
to
ahead,
continue case 13-SE-20 to Thursday, June 4th, 7 o'clock, virtual meeting for the wood application.
I'll
Is there a
second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, Suzanne,
Suzanne?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Audrey,
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, 5-0. Okay, thank you, everyone. Their motion.
Thank you much, folks.
Adjourn. Go back.
Are the board members willing to handle the minutes?
If
Yeah.
there were no amendments, we could just do a bulk vote on them, but if you got amendments, then maybe table the one that needs to be amended and
Yeah, I just would like to get these out of the way if the board would be willing.
Matt, I would like to say that the only couple amendments I had, I passed on to you and you've made those amendments, so I'm happy with them.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that has any?
move
I
to
have no
approve as
amendments.
written.
Okay, motion second.
Move,
Second.
move to approve as written, March 2nd, April 6th, and May 4th, 2020.
I'll second. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Suzanne,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Audrey,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Okay. Anything else, Matt, for us tonight?
No, thank you all for your patience. I know that even though that was only 2 hours, it was kind of a long meeting in some senses. So I'll see you on Thursday of this week at 7 p.m.
Okay, motion to
Move to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Okay, all in
Second.
favor? Okay, Suzanne,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Audrey, Sarah,
Yes.
and
Yes.
myself, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
board
thank you, everyone.
members.
We'll see you guys Thursday.
Thank you.